Welcome back. This morning, or whenever you're watching this, I guess I'm doing this in the morning, and I've been didn't get much sleep last night, and I'm highly caffeinated. And despite what Red Bull will tell you, I do not have wings. If anything, I have bags under my eyes. So I'm gonna do my best here. I also have a little bit of a clogged sinus. You wouldn't think this thing would get clogged, right? Just kidding. Anyway. So today we're going to talk about kind of either a smorgasbord of different topics from consultation and supervision to some of the business parts and a little bit of the ethics that go along with that. And then a little bit about working in like healthcare agencies and organizations and documentation kind of stuff. So it's going to be a little, maybe a smorgasbord is not the right word, but a smattering of different topics. We'll say that. So anyway, without further ado, let us go. So, obviously, I'm covering up the titles again, but this title says Working with Others. So, let's start by talking about interdisciplinary coordinated services. One of the requirements for a lot of us will be working in health systems. And that's a little bit tricky because some of us will work in private practice settings where we're kind of isolated and doing our own thing. We bill insurance on our own, or our agency does, and we work within our group but keep our same clients and don't have a lot of options in terms of referring out to psychiatric providers for medications or to other medical services for sort of interrelated medical conditions that impact mental health. And so how we do our case management is typically not something we talk about in therapeutic services a whole lot. Even school counselors, for those of you who are in schools, you might have a school psych around. You might have kind of like social workers maybe kind of available to help coordinate with services. But oftentimes that falls upon us to do that kind of work. So it's a little strange because some people will have that on their sites. Like if you're working at a place like Rogers or I can't think of another name of a specific place around here, but some people work for the within the court system or work for like a county agency where they have social workers, parole officers, attorneys, and that kind of stuff. So some of you will have interdisciplinary coordinated services, but a lot of you won't. And so how we talk about this is really a little bit tricky. So this is why at the very beginning of this class, I ask you to think about what do you think might be your role later? And probably most of you don't really know exactly how you're going to fit within this system. So I'm going to talk about it generally and hope that some of this applies later on, which again, put it in your back pocket, save it for a later day. So when we're talking about coordinated services, let's think about the kind of people that might be coordinating with you or that you might coordinate with. There's psychologists if you need further assessment for people who need intelligence assessment or assessment for autism spectrum disorder or ADHD, or using some of those assessment tools that are just beyond our training to use. So you might have to work with a psychologist to get assessments. Oftentimes what people do is they say, well, you need to get an assessment. Here's the name of somebody. Now go figure it out. And that's not terrible. I know I'm making it sound kind of bad, but that's a reasonable thing to do to expect clients to do that. However, the more we know the good people that do the good work, resources that are within the financial means of our clients, or just even options of people that are taking on clients, that can be extremely helpful for clients to know because they don't know this system and they don't know who the people are. And it's really helpful as we learn our work and learn our communities that we have that kind of information. If you don't, like I don't, well, I'm here, I rely on other people. And so I have a network of people that I'm building of these are people that live in these various communities that I can ask questions to. It's just part of what we do as we get to know our work. Also, social workers, if we don't have access to things like housing support or benefits, a lot of people that we work with are going to be on different kinds of benefits or even like understanding their insurance and that kind of stuff. So social workers can help with that kind of thing. Marriage and family therapists can be a help if you don't do couples work yourself. PTs or physical therapists, occupational therapists, medical doctors for medications, or psychiatrists more specifically, depending on the kind of medications that you're looking for. My experience has been that medical doctors are trained kinda in prescribing for, well, I shouldn't say that kind of. They are trained in prescribing medications for people with things like depression and anxiety. However, and they can do that pretty well for the most part. But psychiatrists are really important if you're diagnosing somebody with like bipolar disorders or more significant anxiety related disorders, that kind of thing, or any other condition, personality disorders or whatever. Specifically, if there's like a psychosis or something like that, or schizophrenia that needs to be managed, those need to be done by a psychiatrist. And so medical doctors or primary care providers can be great for a lot of things, and us knowing a little bit about their expertise is helpful. With that said, the sub bullet point here is knowing your scope. Knowing what you do and what these other people do can be really helpful to be thinking about as you move forward. Because when you are sort of coordinating with people, it's really helpful for you to communicate to them, this is what I do and this is what you do. In fact, I was just on a call the other day with a parole officer, and she was saying something like, the client that I'm working with has to do some stuff that's, I'm going to be really vague here because it's an open client that I have, but is working on completing some classes required by the judge. Also is just looking for some community resources because they don't have transportation. So it's really hard to get to do things like community service. And she was like, oh, great. Can you help figure that out? And that's really not my role. It's not my job. That's kind of what she does. And yet at the same time, within the means that I have, I'm happy to help out so that we can get to do the work. Because if a client really struggles with these things and is coming in saying, well, I just don't have money, or I don't have transportation, so it's really hard to get here, and I've got these medical things going on, I will usually take a little bit of my time to do some of that case management work to help support this person. But we don't have a ton of time to do that outside of our work. If we have client cancellations, we can do a little more of that, but that's not really what our therapeutic role is. And yet, many of us will get good at knowing our communities and can really provide that kind of support in small ways. Also, I think I mentioned this to all of you at some point, and some of you more specifically, just given the papers you're handing in and the way you're talking about your future work. But part of what we can do is when we're communicating with other people, they use a different kind of language. Doctors really want to know about diagnoses so they can prescribe because that's the information they need. Social workers might need to know about life circumstances, which we may not care quite as much about, because to do our internal psychological, emotional, behavioral kind of work, we don't have to know a ton about housing other than it puts stress on people and it's really troublesome. It's really distressing when people don't have consistent housing. What we look at mostly is we want to understand interpersonal relationships and the quality and quantity of their meeting their attachment needs, that kind of stuff. So knowing what kind of things social workers are looking for can help if we gather that information in advance and share that with them. So I'm not going to talk about all those, but I'll just say that part of what we do is we get to translate to other people what our work is. Also, I will say one other thing. When another thing that's not mentioned up here that we'll talk about in a little bit is working with insurance. Because if you want to get paid, you have to communicate what the problem is in a language that insurance knows. And sometimes when we're talking about things like trauma and attachment and emotional bonding, they're like, I don't know what that means. I just want to know if this is a condition that's dysfunctional enough based on our understanding of that, which is basically the DSM. So we translate things like attachment issues into a clinical diagnosis that we then share with a payer or somebody doing an audit on a record system or something like that, a medical terminology. The third bullet point is about that medical model, and this kind of explains that translation thing. And we've talked about that a little bit early on in the class, and you'll get more of that as you go through different classes too, especially if you're taking appraisals with me or the assessment class. We'll definitely talk more about that because we'll be practicing some of this translation into diagnostic language using the assessment tools. And that really helps us understand the conditions also so that we can treat those. But also there's a significant part of our work that just isn't really captured well enough by the assessment tools. It doesn't make sense with the diagnostic categories fully. I mean, it does, but it's hard to translate that. And so that's kind of our task. So I'll leave that part there and we can touch on that later. The last one here is about being respectful of other professions. We've mentioned this in class before, and you guys are probably aware that there's this politics about different philosophies of, because social workers and MFTs and counselors and psychologists all are kind of working in the same sandbox, but doing slightly different things sometimes, other times doing the exact same thing. There's always this tension between who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong and who's doing it better. And, a lot of times I think we get in this mistake of, we see one social worker or psychologist who isn't practicing well, just like there's counselors who don't practice well. And then we label all counselors or all psychologists, social workers as being like not that good or not understanding it or not getting it. And my advice to you there is just avoid that kind of politics. These people are our neighbors, and we can ostracize them by name calling them and treating them like others and enemies, which actually I have a little slide here to talk about that in a second. Or we can keep them in our inner circle and say, here's how we practice. Here's what I think is the ideal work and what clients need and that kind of thing. And I don't know if this is the exact way that I would want to say this, but I'm struggling with the words for it. But keeping people in the inner circle, staying relational with them, and then giving them an opportunity to improve if you think there are improvements to be made is a lot better than saying you're an idiot and then making judgments about them. That really isn't what we know about attachment and supporting people with empathy and even words like professionalism, right? So the more you can avoid making villains out of other people, and I use that word intentionally because I recently read a book where if you find yourself creating victim stories or villain stories, making enemies or victims out of either yourself, your clients, your profession, whatever, it often is an indicator that you're not really open to working things out and making things more functional and better. So just something to keep in mind. Some of this goes for working with other counselors as well. So the point I want to make here is not just about other counselors doing poor work or wonderful work or whatever, or just not getting it. There's a lot of that, and it's equally as dysfunctional. But one of the things I've been giving feedback to many of you is you have a unique way of looking at this. You have a unique expertise. And sometimes just because we went through the same program or we graduated within the same profession, we assume that other people know what we know or understand things that we understand. And that just isn't really true. In fact, I've heard recently from several site supervisors out in our community in southern Wisconsin, they're like, the Whitewater students are just a little bit different. And oftentimes the feedback I hear is they're a little bit more well prepared than other programs, which means that even though you're working alongside somebody who's working on a counseling license, they may not understand the same theoretical orientation as you. They may not have the same expertise in whatever your specialty is, whether it's spirituality, sexuality, a specific diagnosis, anxiety, OCD, depression, whatever the thing is. You might have something unique that other people don't understand. So the more you can help other people know what you know and feel confident in your unique expertise, the better off you'll be in communicating with them and establishing yourself as somebody who is kind of, you can build referrals by having an expertise. You don't have to worry about that now, because later on, once you get comfortable working with the clients that you're working with, whoever they are, as you're sort of building experiences with different kinds of people, you'll naturally be inclined to have experience working with kids or specific diagnoses or something like that. Some of you have a good idea of what your specialty is now, but that's also something that will develop in time as you build a practice too. So don't worry about that too much. Focus on kindness and focus on confidence, and those things will get you a long way. Confidence in yourself, knowing what you know and how that might be different than what other people don't know. That's totally okay to do that. Do it with humility and don't be cocky. Sound like a jerk, but you know what I mean? Like, don't assume people know things. That's the point. Also, when it comes to understanding the scope of our practice, as we said above, and understanding your specific expertise, one of the things we've talked about is wearing different hats. When you're doing an intake evaluation, you're doing a lot more data collection than you are providing therapy and using those skills that we learn in principles to really make connections and make bonds with people so that you can kind of apply the medicine, so to speak. So even within our role, we sometimes we shift in our focus of I'm just gathering information here, or I'm providing therapeutic treatment. Those are different things. Okay. And we'll get more into that when we get to other classes too. But sometimes you're going to be the therapist and you're going to provide the treatment to people. You're going to do skills trainings. You're going to do psychoeducation. You're going to talk to people about their dysfunctions, or their pains, I should say. You're going to use your therapeutic skills to create relationship to help people move forward in ways that their nervous system is longing for. With that said, you'll also have a part of your work where you'll be an employee, and you'll have to care about your agency policies and your the culture of the people that are working around you, and HR stuff and sort of legal policies in terms of where you work and how much you're paid and all that kind of stuff. So there's that part of your work too that we kind of separate between the therapeutic work. You're also a licensee, which is the reason why we focus so much on the laws in this program. You have that, which sometimes can conflict or contradict your employment policies. For school counselors especially, this is a really particularly salient point, because one of the things that's happened for not even just decades, for like almost probably a century now, is that school counselors used to be called guidance counselors. And you'd be in the school to help provide additional guidance that teachers really didn't know how to do. In other words, like this, services and supports for families that don't have them. The counselor, the teacher provides instruction for the, mental knowledge or whatever. And then guidance counselors can help find work and set up classes for, unique learners and that kind of thing. And now school counseling, there's this one side of a group that says, well, we do more therapy, and another side that says, no, it's not really, it is a little bit of therapy, but it's all this other stuff too. Remember, we're guidance counselors after all. And so in my profession of rehab counseling, there's a very similar thing of some people really embody this therapeutic stuff because of the emotional needs of students. And other people say, no, we do different things. So knowing your role within your profession and who you are and what kind of work you do really helps communicate to other people, because you'll have school counselors within your profession, and even for you mental health clinicians, other people will say, well, no, therapy looks like this. And you're like, well, but what about this other stuff too? I do this too. And they're like, that's not therapy. And I think you can kind of get where this is going. So you'll hear a lot of different demands that are placed on you from all these different things, from licensing to employment to state laws to people within your profession telling you, this is what I need from you, this is what you do, and this is who you are. And part of the reason we spend so much time understanding our own unique professional identity, teaching you about that in class, but also as you get out and grow into your specific expertise, the culture of the place that you work at, and then understanding the whole profession in general, which is what we spend more time on here, that can help you really build a better, more confident understanding of who you are, so that when it comes time to communicate that to other people, you know that you're not out of bounds even when other people disagree with you. So that's just part of the learning process. You'll come to understand that stuff later. The depth of your understanding will be defined by the people that are around you and how much you are really interested in getting clear about this stuff. So it's kind of on you to take in what we have to offer here, and also take it with a grain of salt, because we're trying to give you this understanding of the whole wide scope of the profession, but you're really going to need to chisel down and define who you are in the setting that you come from with your specific expertise too. That's your part of this. And then the last point is just practice how you talk about your various roles. I used to do this assignment in the career class that I used to teach. Ola teaches it all now, but when I used to teach it, I would do these elevator speeches. And if you've never heard that term before, it's basically saying, here's who I am and what I do in a very short snippet in the time that you could go from one floor to the next in an elevator. Sometimes you tell people in one sentence who you are and what you do. There's always questions like, I'm a counselor, I'm a therapist. Is it the same thing? Can I call myself a psychologist? I have a psychology degree on my undergrad after all. And there's all this language that you have to figure out, how do I use this? And so a elevator speech could be, one floor worth of one sentence. What do you do? I'm a therapist. Well, that comes with baggage too. Other times you'll have an opportunity to say a couple sentences about what you are over the phone to another person who's wondering about why you're calling them or something. And you have a few sentences to give about, this is what I do, this is what my role is, and this is how I'm working with this client. And yet other times, and this is what we spend time doing here, is that you can, there's much longer form versions, like when you're sitting around a table with your family and they don't quite understand what you do, and you're trying to explain to them the nuances. And of course, your moms and dads don't even get it anyway. And they're just like, oh, there's a therapist. They can fix people's mental problems. And you're like, yeah, but it's kind of more than that, right? So in other words, practice short form, middle form, and long form versions of who you are and what you do. And of course, we do a lot of that self-reflective work here in class too, in all these classes. But it's something you can specifically work on as you go forward. I won't be giving you that assignment, but if you just something to think about as you're talking to people. Okay, so let's take a counselor as an employee. What do we want to say about this? Employment law, what are your rights and obligations? Most of us, I would like to say all of us, but probably not all of us, work with an at-will doctrine. And what that means is you don't have the right to employment. Just because you get hired, it's a privilege to be hired, and employers have a lot of legal power to keep you hired or let you go. So this is kind of one of those places where a lot of us get stuck between, well, my agency is saying this and I have to comply with their demands. Otherwise, I can't stay working here. What choice do I have? And the choices are either you find some other place to work. You can be civilly disobedient and just not do what they ask, which puts you in a pretty precarious spot. But it's a privilege to work for somebody, legally speaking. So this is where some people make the choices. Well, if I can't play in the sandbox with others, or I think they're doing unethical things, then I have options. But oftentimes these lead to really sticky ethical places. It's really common for people to get into an internship site. And some rightly say, there's a lot of weird stuff that's ethically questionable going on here. And also there are these times when we as students go into sites and we say, this doesn't seem like what my professors told me this is supposed to be like, or they're not embodying the values, or they're doing things that seem a little shady. And they might just be following the rules and the guidelines and the legal advice that they're getting. And it might keep them legally safe with their attorneys and with their, following employment laws. But it doesn't always fit our therapeutic intent. And so we have to navigate some ethical situations there usually, which mean, how much do I do translation from what our therapeutic work is to what I need to report for billing? And this creates weird situations where people are like, well, I'm just not going to follow the rules. I'll call everything an adjustment disorder, even if it really isn't. And so those are sticky situations that we can talk about in class. Oftentimes I'll just give you kind of a sample here too. A lot of these have to do with documentation standards and the way people are billing clients. And that's, once you get into practices, you might find things that are like, they just seem a little bit off. And some of you will learn about why the abuses that can happen. Others of you will learn that things that seem like they're illegal or unethical maybe aren't, and they're just not very helpful therapeutically, or they're not really serving you well as an employee. We've talked about things like online counseling services like BetterHelp and some of those things too, which are exploring these new business models, which do some good things. They provide sort of nationwide access to counselors from people who may not otherwise have it. And depending on how they're paying and how they can pay, if they're for-profit companies and they have a board of directors and they have to build capital, there are different incentives there too. And so that's a conversation about business models that we're not going to go deep into here, but they create some ethical situations of whether they're serving the clients. And even if they're serving the clients really well, they may not be serving you. And so those are questions that you'll get to explore later on. Some more of those things that are by me, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit here, but if you have, there's a thin line between venting your frustrations and gossiping and villainizing other people or companies or practices or something like that. Maybe this is just my bias, but saying how something affects you and making your own choices to be okay with it or not okay with it is totally fine. And if you need other people who are non-judgmental, who you can just unload with and they get it and they're not going to judge you for it, that's great. And totally fine, because we need those outlets. However, if you find yourself complaining about something or turning other people into the enemy, like, oh, insurance just sucks, or this company is terrible, or whatever, then don't use it. You have the option to not use it or to go a different direction. But if you feel stuck in a place where you feel like you have to bill insurance because it's the only way to get paid and you hate it, there's an incongruence there, and you got to figure out how to handle that. One way of handling that is controlling sometimes the only thing that you can, which is your attitude. So when it comes to gossiping, just be mindful of that, because it not only hurts you and just you have to live with all that, carry that extra baggage, but it also creates bad impressions. Sometimes this is how other professions look at us and say, like, ugh, yuck, I don't want to be like that, whatever that is. Lots of weird practices in politics and stuff. It just turns people in against each other, and it's not helpful. So this is when you look at your screen and you say, thanks, Dad, for the speech. I got this. But I'll remind you of this later on when I hear people whining about things. I had a situation just the other day. I'll share this with you too, where we were talking about some other fellow people who are working at a place. I'm going to be very vague about this, but other people who are working at a place, and it can be really hard to work with other people, especially when they're not doing a good job or not carrying their responsibilities, their workload. And there were some terms used that were just kind of derogatory, like, oh, they're just so stupid. They just don't get it. And it's one thing to say, I really struggle with how they're doing their work, and it impacts me, and it means that I have to take on more responsibility, or I just can't tolerate the kind of way that they carry themselves, and it just bothers me. That's okay, because that's saying this is how I experience it, and this is what I need to work through. But calling other people names and making judgments about them, their profession, their skill level, their competence, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't help you and it doesn't help them. So just want to make that comment because it likely will come up. Either you'll feel that stuff, which is normal, or other people will feel it, and you'll have an opportunity to either join them, support them in a better understanding, or just ignore it and set some boundaries and leave them on their way, because you don't need to deal with that stuff. There's your options. So I guess I'm kind of mentioning this other stuff here. You have the choice to stay and work on a conflict with another employee, a fellow colleague, a boss, a big medical system. This is where we can advocate in other ways that don't directly impact our clients, but indirectly absolutely do impact the work that we do. If you have complaints or comments, we're supposed to have this sort of chain of command where you have a supervisor or a boss or somebody that you can work with. It's pretty normal, unfortunately, to have people who are above you in the power structure who are either doing something improper or not supporting you in the way that you think they should. And those are conversations that will come up later. I can assure you several of you will have that kind of situation that comes up. It's unfortunate. It's normal. The analogy that I always create, or they always explain, is that you'll have plenty of clients who come in and say, I am the way I am and I feel the way I feel. I experience life the way I do because my parents did their best, but I also feel like I had to learn so many things on my own that I wish somebody would have told me or taught me. In other words, we wish people were around that could give us good information and support us through things and call us on our BS and, really be somebody who's learned and wiser and we can turn to as a support. And yet that doesn't always happen. And sometimes we have to make mistakes and learn on our own. So we want to go up the chain in situations where there's conflict. But as you can see behind my head, I'll try and get out of the way here. I'll just do this. You can pause it if you need to read this. As you can see by those comments, sometimes when things don't work, you just have to figure it out because your parents aren't going to teach you. You have to leave that organization because it's not practicing in a way that works with your values or, with your ethics or whatever the situation. If you still have a job and you're advocating for change and you are kind of being a whistleblower or just an obnoxious employee or whatever, you have to figure out how to navigate that. If you go up the chain of command and advocate for better practices and you don't find people who are going to find ways to fire you or just create toxic environments around you, there are other options to advocate for organizational policy change. We can talk more specifically about those options, but there is a community of people here who want the best, and how you do that is where we get involved in politics. And I usually use politics as kind of a nasty word, but politics is really just the organization and administration of big systems. It's how the United States government and the state government says we want to provide for our citizens and keep the environment safe, and so we have to make laws or rules that apply to all of these people. And so that is a way that you can get involved in it. And there's so much room for discord and fighting and lying and cheating and stealing to get people's way, right? Because there's power and money involved in it, right? And I also think there's a way, which I'm not going to talk in detail here, about staying relational, not making enemies out of people, and we'll talk about it a little bit, and just doing it in a way that says, I'm going to speak my piece, I'm going to explain with evidence, I'm going to make a convincing argument for why change needs to happen. And if everybody around me is going to be toxic, at least I can leave with my integrity or stay with my integrity, something like that. Stay grounded and relational at all times. Another way of saying that is that when our nervous system goes into high conflict settings, like having to advocate for good ethics or organizational policies, if we can learn the skills to stay relational, keep our nervous system regulated, and advocate for ourselves without responding to manipulative tactics or just people yelling at us or calling us names or turning us into the bad guys, and say, I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and I understand what people's needs are, including the people that are my adversaries, so to speak, then that will serve you very well in life. I'll just say that. So I'll talk more about that specifically in a second to give you a little bit more guidance on that. But did I go backwards? I think I went backwards. Yeah, here we go. So the quick side note. I don't know how quick it is, but it's a side note nonetheless. Staying relational amidst conflict. This is something that I've spent a little bit of time on in my research, I guess you could say, or just my personal learning. The idea is, how do I engage in conflict, especially in the midst of big emotions? Like some of us, I haven't talked about it in great detail in this ethics class, but some of us, you can get yelled at all day long because you grew up in an environment where people are yelling and screaming, and you're like, yeah, people yell all the time. What's the big deal? Or you grew up on the East Coast or West Coast where people are more direct and, can call you a name and you're like, oh, have a good day, thanks, whatever, We don't do that here in the Midwest typically very well. We get quiet, we get passive, and then passively aggressive. That's just what we do. Or instantly our nervous system is activated and we go into this like, oh crap mode, right? So how do we engage in conflict about an idea, a process, a value, or whatever it is without losing connection with another person? So here's a list of things it's kind of like a test you can ask yourself. How do I know when I'm in fight, flight, or freeze mode? Most of us are decently good at understanding when we have a huge lump in our throat, or our face is flushed, or we lose the ability to think, which we normally have. We're normally smart people who understand things. And then when someone gets angry with us, we're like, oh, what do I do? What do I say? Right? So if you find yourself wanting other people to lose, if you find yourself getting into competitive situations where you think, I have to strategize here about how I'm going to win the argument, get my voice heard, make sure my position is attended to or something like that, and I want to make sure I win this argument, or at least, I don't know, make other people not get their way, it's a pretty good indicator that you're in some kind of fight, flight, or freeze mode, okay? And by the way, I probably won't talk about all these, but we can talk about them in class if you really want to. If I can't tell when others are trying to help, In other words, someone comes to you and says, I have something to share with you about what you're saying, how you're feeling, what you're thinking. This is like getting feedback from us as professors. I would love to say that most of the time we do it from the goodness of our heart, and yet sometimes we do it in a way that's not very supportive or kind even sometimes. And yet, what is the helping thing that behind other people's words? If you can't tell if someone's really trying to help you, they just sound like a jerk, it usually means that you're not seeing their best intent or their best interest behind their words. That's a kind of a tricky thing because sometimes people are just jerks and you just set a boundary with them. And yet, oftentimes what we want to do is fight back, right? Because we hear the words, not the intent. So that's just something to consider. Also, when you're giving feedback to clients, other people, when you're advocating your position, if you start using language that people find offensive or obnoxious or whatever, they're not going to look at you as a helper who wants the best for them and for other people. They're going to look at you as an obnoxious a-hole who they want to fight with and just ignore, right? So you're going to trigger their fight or flight responses. If you're recruiting other people to attack, in other words, if you have a problem with me on a grade or something I've said in class or whatever, and then you talk to your fellow students, again, I mentioned this, it's one thing to vent and say, oh, that's hurtful. I don't like the way he talks to us or the thing he said to me or whatever, the feedback that I got. And that's just looking for support from other people who can empathize with you. And that's okay. And yet, if you're villainizing me or somebody else or whatever, to get validation that I'm the jerk and you're the victim, it's a pretty good indicator that there's something going on here that puts you in a position of like, I feel under attack. I feel like I'm in fight or flight mode and I need to defend by grabbing somebody else and making me feel like I'm not alone in the situation. So it's a good indicator. I feel justified in hating somebody else. I see others' motives as bad. Is that apostrophe in the right place? I don't know. I'm not good with apostrophes. I graduated with 4 years of an English degree and I still don't know apostrophes that well. Maybe I did at one point, but I've forgotten. Anyway, if you turn people into objects, this includes labeling them with words that are just dehumanizing. I talk to you as one of these kind of people instead of the human being that has feelings and value as just a person. But you're one of those people. Oh, you're a Democrat. You're a Republican. You're a Midwesterner. You're a New Yorker. Like whenever you get into that labeling language, that is naturally what we are inclined to do. It's how our brains work to organize information, and there's a cost. So that systematic need to categorize and understand people and use words to explain them also takes away a little bit of their essence and the complicated nature and our ability to empathize with people. So sometimes even just using words can be hurtful and harmful to the way that we're accessing our capacity to stay relational amidst just our normal way of functioning. If you feel alone, like no one is on your side, if you'll attack or withdraw from allies, that means the people that are normally there to support you, but you're pulling away from them because pulling away from them or pushing back against them because you can't see that they're really trying to help or they're good for you, that's an indicator that something's going on. So some of these kind of duplicative maybe or fit together. I don't know, but hopefully you get the point. And then if you look at any of this stuff above and you see it as, well, I need to set boundaries and push people away because it's a strength of mine. It's something I do really well. I'm ruggedly independent. I'm self-reliant. I am just one of those people who doesn't take shit from nobody. Or I keep myself safe by withdrawing. It's just what I do. And it's really important that I do that because the world is a dangerous place and you shouldn't trust people or something like that. If you're talking about those things as a strength and not saying, yeah, the world is a dangerous place, but I can't do anything about that or be with people unless I'm willing to connect, even though they're imperfect people. They're, sometimes for those of you that are spiritual, you say, yeah, everybody's a sinner. And I would love to still see them as my fellow community people, or, everybody is part of this country and we have to care for people in a certain way. But I just, I think it's important that I make sure that my values are heard so that we win this political race or whatever the thing is. So if you see any of these above as a strength, it means there's something going on which takes away your capacity to be relational, to tune into that essence of people with regardless of the labels, and maintain empathy for them, even amidst their bad behavior or bad personality or whatever it is. So this is a side note. It's not really ethically related, but it has some ethical implications in terms of how do I maintain an ethical position and do what is right. Part of what is right is staying attached to people, because that's the medicine that our professional work relies on, not making enemies, even when people can be so dumb and so frustrating and so dysfunctional. And yet, I don't always love this quote, but I think there's some value in it. The people that need love the most are the ones that are the hardest to love. So take it or leave it. Okay. Supervision. Let's talk a little bit about supervision. There's an inherent dual relationship in supervision. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard this, one of us say this before to you, but sometimes teachers say, well, I can't support students because I'm a teacher, I'm not a counselor. When I'm wearing my counselor hat, I can be empathetic and hear you, but as a teacher, I'm an evaluator, and a gatekeeper to the profession. And I think we're probably both. And it's a really tricky place to be as a professor, because sometimes I just want to give you positive feedback and say, this is what helps you grow. This is what you need. You need a non-judgmental environment in order to thrive, right? And because I have this responsibility to give you feedback that helps you get better and improve, and a gatekeeper, which means if you're not improving or you're not doing well enough, I have to be able to say, this is not the right place for you. It's not the right time for you, or something like that. Your bosses are the same way. They have to keep you, they have to function. They have to maintain a functioning organization, because if the money runs out, or they pay their employees too much, or you're doing practices that are just making things not work, poor culture, you're not following through with your documentation or something like that, they have to keep the business alive. So they have, for the benefit of clients and you and themselves, right? So like there's an inherent dual relationship there that can't really be avoided. And it's an important one to understand, that both of them have to exist at the same time, even though we go through our ethical code and we say we'd love to avoid all these dual relationships, right? I think I'm going to avoid, or not avoid, but just like pass over the second one, because I think I've already mentioned this about having people above you and below you in conflict and that kind of stuff. I think this one, most of you will get this, and it's worth mentioning that referral situations can become complicated when they're not motivated by the best client care, but by business relationships, which may or may not be unethical or illegal. In other words, it's okay to know who's a good referral, and it's okay to know who the people are that you trust, and to build rapport with other counselors and other support services in the community. But it's also a little bit risky when you are avoiding certain services. Like one that always comes up is like CPS. CPS serves a very, very important role, and they have such a big job, and they have such an obligation to do things that are really painful and hurtful to people that feel like they're not in their best interest, like take kids out of the home and put them into foster care situations, and protect children whose parents are not protecting them. It's a really, really, really hard role. And it seems like, wouldn't it be best if kids just stayed with their parents? Yeah, that's ideal in an ideal world, right? Or wouldn't it be best if I only just referred to the competent counselors? In other words, I don't make referrals to other people, only this small group. What if all those people are filled up and the client can't be seen? Does that mean you don't make referrals to other people, even if the care is not quite as good? There's an ethical situation there, right? So is it motivated by helping the client get what they need? It's okay to want them to get the best by only referring to the best, and yet there's something to be said for referring to anybody, because you need to let clients make their own choices, right? So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. There's more situations where we get into these sticky places where we kind of want to avoid, but they're often hard to see and hard to explain. When it comes to working in private practices specifically, we'll spend a little time on this. I'm just checking the time here. We're at 45 minutes-ish. there's a lot of you in here that will probably either work in or own one of your own. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. I think I've kind of summed up actually a lot of this when I said that as an employer or a business owner, you have these multiple priorities or multiple hats, as we've been using that term. You want to do good therapeutic work, but you also have to set limits with how much time you can spend with clients and the things you can do with them and for them. Because you have to run a business, you have to also spend time doing things like marketing and getting out and getting additional trainings and maybe be a trainer for your community, that kind of stuff. So it comes with a whole different set of ethical decisions, which is why one of the reasons why we recommend people like don't jump into private practice right away. Keep it on your radar. If it's one of your future goals, that's a wonderful thing. It's absolutely wonderful to be a small business owner and to provide your unique services in your community. However, there's so much to know and learn about it. Specifically, just as it relates to this conversation, there's so much to know about what you are and what you do and what you can't do, and all these other sort of complicated regulations and business relationships and that kind of stuff that are just tough to figure out. Or they just take time, even if they're not that hard, they just take time and energy. So focusing on your clinical work is kind of the priority that we have for you now, or that should be a priority, is providing really good care, and then using your business skills or your, getting out on your own to do that in a unique way, something you can do once you get that set. A couple weeks ago, we talked about coaching versus counseling, and that part of the conversation is relevant here because there are some activities that you may want to provide or services that you may want to provide that aren't specifically counseling, that don't require a license. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because we've already talked about it a little bit, but like if you are providing trainings for people, you're not going to bill insurance for providing trainings, but you have to, some people will set up two separate businesses and get two separate bank accounts to use training money for one thing and client sourced money for another thing. So if you do any of those things, that's where this conversation comes in of like, do I do it under the umbrella of my therapy practice, which might change the kind of insurance you pay for or the kind of business structure you have? Or do you set up a different business that does this consulting work or something like that? These are all these kind of considerations that probably won't make a lot of difference to you now, but later on they might. And when you do stuff like that, it really challenges your ethics because there's a question of whether you're really providing therapeutic services to other people or whether it's really a whole thing altogether, or whether you're motivated by the money or motivated by client care. Those are always big questions in people's minds. And then, of course, I don't know what else to say about this, but we've kind of already said it, but some of the skills that you'll need to have, and I'll get it out of the way here, is be able to manage accounting, manage billing, which takes time to communicate with insurers, especially if they don't pay you for something that you think you should get paid for, and you're sitting on a customer service line waiting for someone to respond, or you're on hold forever. Meanwhile, you have a client coming up in 45 minutes and you don't know how long it's going to take. You know what I mean? I've heard so many people say, I would love to take Medicaid because it's just important to me to give back to my community and provide access. And it's just impossible to do because they don't pay out. There's so many auditing requirements, and the pay is low. And so it's just not financially viable. And that's a problem. That's a problem for our country and the health of our people. And yet it's a completely reasonable thing to say, I can't do this, or I'm just going to choose not to do this because it's too much of a headache. And I get it. And other people get it. It's a hard place to be in, but that's what really tests your values as a professional and your values as a person too. And then also another thing, when I say policy making right behind me here, it's not so much policy making like legislation and legislative advocacy. When you did your informed consent assignment and you had to say like, here's how much I charge, and here's what I do in emergency situations, and here's how I handle no shows or late shows or all that kind of stuff. Those are just your own personal policies. And that's stuff that takes time and takes intention too about how you want to work and how you want to run your business. There are a lot. Whenever I see posts like this on Facebook or on some other forums like Reddit forums or something, there's always an ethical question of like, can we do this? Or am I doing something wrong? Or responding to other people saying it's unethical not to accept clients who are this, that, and the other thing. They're poor. We can't discriminate against people on race, religion, gender, age, disability status, et cetera, et cetera. But you can if they're poor because they don't have the money. So you can say, I can't be a client because you can't pay me, which is kind of a reasonable thing. And it seems problematic to some of us who want to provide services for the underserved or marginalized populations or whatever. So there's an ethical question there. This is something I'm not going to take a ton of time on, but I'm going to leave it here and I'm going to breeze over these really quick because some of you kind of want to know this stuff. I don't know that we have the time to really go into depth. If you guys know Shannon from our program, she will do some of this. She has some additional training. So if you're interested in private practices is relevant to you. Also, since 2020 and more people moving states and all that stuff about the counseling compact, more people are setting up their own businesses so they can do things in unique ways. And they're providing trainings on this for newer counselors. More people are trying to get paid being site supervisors too, because they want that diverse stream of income. But let's talk about business structure. First of all, the easiest and most simple is the sole proprietor. It's the most fitting for most people when they first start doing things like providing additional trainings or additional, if you're doing consulting work with people. If you're doing clinical work, it's not really the best thing. And this it says eat all the profits and assume the risk. I think that means reap all the profits. All the profits. That was a typo. The reason for the difference between all of these is how they're taxed and how you're protected legally as a business entity. And so I'm not going to talk a lot about S Corps and C Corps that are down here under this other section right here. But as a sole proprietor, when you send in your taxes to the government every April, or hopefully a little bit earlier so you can get them back on time, but when you send those in, you use your own social security number. And if you were to, say, not pay taxes or get in trouble for doing something, even accidentally, they come at you and say, well, some of that money was from your husband's job or your wife's job, and also from your therapy practice, and you didn't pay taxes on therapy, but we're going to take all your money anyway because we don't know how to separate it. We don't know how to understand it as different. We just understand that you have this one tax ID and it relates to your family, and that's what we're going to use, right? So the reason for doing something like an LLC down here, I'll get to partnerships in a second, it's called a limited liability company. In other words, you change the liability so that you create a separate business entity. That way, if something happens, if you go bankrupt because you can't pay, you're just not making any money, you're not going to really go bankrupt in an LLC. But if you're not making money or you're not paying a tax, or something happens, you get sued and you have to pay out a lawsuit, which doesn't happen that often. Don't be scared of that. But it is a good thing to be able to protect it, because that means that all that money that your husband makes and that you make from, maybe a side job, or that just whatever it is that's part of your personal life, they're not going to come after you, your bank account, your home, and all your other assets. They're just going to take it away from the company. It's a lot more complicated than that. But typically the limited liability company is what most people start with. If you are getting into a place where you want to have employees, or you want to really benefit from different tax benefits, stuff like that, like if your company's getting bigger and you're doing strange things with not employees but 1099 contractors and stuff like that, which many of you will work as a 1099 contractor, then you'll want to have talk to an accountant, talk to your tax attorney or your business attorney or whatever, because they'll be able to provide more information on what's the benefit of being an S Corp or a C Corp, and given your unique situation and business structure, they can provide more information on that. But most people don't want to do that because it's just added work. You have to have a board of directors, you have to set up meetings, you have to pay quarterly taxes, not annual taxes, stuff like that. So you can save money and make more money, but there's also additional requirements there. The thing about the partnerships is they can sound great. You can meet people just like a marriage. You can meet a person, think they're great, this is all going to work out, we think so alike, and when stars align when we're together and all that kind of stuff. And when things go south, it can really challenge your well-being and welfare too. So they can be great, but it's not always that great. So that's one of those things you're going to want to get some support in thinking about if you're going to do that. Lastly, nonprofit work. A lot of people like the idea of nonprofit work usually for own personal value reasons. But one of the things about nonprofit work is one of the ways you have to structure it is you say, I'm not going to make a lot of money as a CEO, and I'm not going to have take all that extra money that I'm not paying back for overhead costs and employee fees and all that kind of stuff. Instead of taking all that money and reinvesting it into the company, a for-profit company gets to take it and bring it home or share it with shareholders. Nobody in the counseling world has stock or has shareholders or anything like that. But as a nonprofit, even if you're putting all that money back into the community or to your business or whatever it is, you still have to have a board of directors, and your board of directors gets to make a lot of decisions about who you are as a CEO and the decisions you make. So it takes a little bit of that freedom away from you to be able to make decisions. And there's a lot more politics in making your board of directors happy with the way things are going. So I'm not going to talk more about that. But one last thing I will say, though, is if you do own a business, this is advice that I've heard from multiple people from me, and I've read it in many sources, is oftentimes we think, how can I pay my bills? How can I pay the bills? I got to do this, and everything else comes to me. And you'll get this advice: pay yourself first. Make sure you establish an income that you're comfortable with. And even if you can't pay your bills, make sure you pay yourself first. And so I'm not going to say anything more about that, but just write that down if you're going to open a private practice, because it's really, really important that you make sure you care about your income. One thing I will say is, for all the people who aren't thinking about these businessy kind of things, you will be thinking about pay eventually, and it is okay to think about pay. It's okay to take a job that pays you more money, and you just have to make some good value judgments about what kind of work environment do I want to have, what kind of client services do I want to support, what kind of activities, like work-life activities, not work-life activities, but how do people create balance and that kind of stuff at my job. It's okay to care about all those things. Sometimes some of us have a really hard time because we really want to do what's right for the client and do really good therapeutic work and meet their needs because we want to be so helpful and we want people to be healthy. And yet we also have to be healthy too. And this is part of that. It's not just about seeing your own therapist and working through your own stuff so you don't have therapeutic problems, countertransference kind of problems. But also, you have to make sure you get paid, and you have to make sure you have a good work-life balance and are in a culture that is supportive of you where you can thrive too. It's okay to talk about that stuff. Some people, not everybody needs to hear that, but some of you need to hear that it's okay to prioritize yourself and your needs. So, and what I'll say last about that, holy crap, I'm way behind schedule here. What I'll say last about that is that, I forgot what I was going to say. So moving on. When it comes to setting fees, I'm going to really speed through because we're already at an hour here. Don't set them too high because clients will go elsewhere. Some people will be inclined to be like, I'm worth a lot more. Oh, I know what I was going to say. You are worth a lot more. You deserve to get paid a lot more than you get paid. I wish we all got paid the same as doctors and psychologists and all that kind of stuff. And yet we can't, that's not the way the system works. You are probably undervalued given the work that you're doing. And there's reason to advocate for that. But we are where we are. And yet at the same breath that I say, accept what we get because that's what how the system works, I'm also saying you're worth more and expect more, and that's okay too. So there's an ethical conversation to have there about how much we're worth and how much we can ask from our clients to pay for those things, whether they have those resources or not. So I am going to skip over. I'll mention sliding scale fees. Let's talk about that in class if you guys have questions about that and how you can make that work, because there's some specific things I can tell you about how you can charge people less pro bono, pay what you can afford, pay a rate that's scaled to your income, that kind of stuff, and yet also not go under as a company, not get inadequately paid for what you're worth. There are ways to navigate through that. I'm going to skip over some of this stuff because we've kind of already talked about it. I'm not going to skip things that we need to talk about, but do not sue clients for unpaid fees. Best to eat the cost. And some of these are just like business practice things that if you're interested in these things, I can talk to you about them later too, but not everybody will be. There's different fee structures. One of them is private pay, so you don't have to take insurance, which means a whole lot more freedom. And yet, if you bill somebody and they don't pay, that's kind of a problem, right? Some people see paying upfront as unethical. You pay for a service before you even know if it's good. And some people stand by that as being like, well, no, I need to get paid. Maybe the first session I'll let them pay later, but after that, that's not going to fly for me. So some people choose to work in wealthier communities because they want more money and they deserve to get more money based on their skill set, or, they have to show in order to work with certain kinds of people, you have to live a certain kind of lifestyle, which just requires that you charge more based on people assume that if you charge more, you're worth more too. And so there's something to be said for that. We already talked about handling exceptions like no-shows, and if insurance won't pay right away, but we'll kind of breeze through that. Some of our other responsibilities, hiring attorneys, we've talked about that in class a little bit, and I think we've talked a little bit today about how important it is to have people that can give you information that you need if you're exploring these kind of things. Got to pay for liability insurance. You always have to have liability insurance. We'll require it as a student. Usually you just get the ACA insurance through a company called HPSO. I forget what it stands for, but it doesn't really matter. But you'll get information about that. Every student in the country has to get insurance. Mostly it's through them. But as you get out and work on your own, there's different liabilities, and so you'll have to get your own. Some other tips about not signing non-compete agreements if you're leaving an agency. Ask about it if you're ever getting that situation. Essentially, it says I'm not going to take my clients with me. I have to build a new referral base. So I'm not stealing clients and that company's income. Yeah, by the time if you do work at an agency and then go out on your own, by that time you'll know how much it costs to keep your license current and how much you'll probably have a little more time and flexibility to explore some of these other things like how you can make extra money by that point and that kind of stuff too. How much do we got left? Okay, just a couple here. The United States insurance system is complicated and messy, and I think for the sake of time and for not overloading you with too much information that's probably not going to be that relevant or beneficial to you right now, there are all kinds of different payment systems. Medicaid is the one that's the most recent and people are exploring right now. Private managed care companies. You might see different terms like MHO right down here, PPO, or you might hear about managed care. And all of these are just different ways of structuring the medical system to try and make it work better. That's the intention anyway, whether it works or not. There's always somebody who gets disadvantages, and whenever there's limited resources and more need that exceed that, somebody misses out on something. And so if you have a bad taste in your mouth about insurance or managed care or any of these other insurance ways of functioning, it's probably because you've seen the disadvantages that happen. And yet the one thing I'll say about this, even though I'm not explaining all this stuff, is that it really is important. And I would love to tell you the story about why I think it's important. Ask your grandma or grandpa about their grandma and grandpa who lived through the Great Depression and what it was like before Americans had Social Security and had a security net where if you hit a deer with your car, if you get sick on the job, if you don't have medical or dental insurance, ask them how expensive that was and how much of a big impact that had on their finances and their ability to thrive in their own personal life. In other words, insurance does a really, really good and important thing for us, and we hate it. Which is kind of an oxymoron, maybe. Not an oxymoron, but there's an inherent contradiction there. Because we need it, and it's important. And also, it's not fun. It sucks to be on to have to pay it. It sucks to have to pay for other people who are part of the same insurance pool. It sucks seeing other people wasting money and making bad decisions and knowing that you're contributing to their benefit. And some people feel that is completely unfair, and there's all kinds of politics to talk about that. And yet, I think it's important and helpful. Just like we need government, we have to have a system of organization, but we may not like how it works all the time. We need a financial system that can provide these kind of safety nets. We don't always like how they work. So this is an explanation of how those work, and I can tell you more about those another time if you want to, if you're interested. The one thing I'll say that I mentioned at the beginning for this last point here is that they have to have a way to communicate with us as a profession. And the way we do it is through diagnosis and treatment plans and that kind of stuff. Whether we like it or not, that's how we make this system work. So there's a lot to be said about whether it's good or bad or whatever, but it is important. I'm going to skip over more of this. Avoid contractual gags, limiting how you can refer out of network. These are all just about like the arrangements you have with insurance companies. That's stuff that you can ask about and learn about later as you get to places, or as you navigate through it yourself. Hopefully what you'll see here is this is not to dissuade you from opening a private practice of your own, but also these are all the kinds of little detail things that you'll get a contract from one insurance provider as you're getting paneled with them. It's the term that we use. You're getting paneled with them. That means you're working out the arrangement of how much they're going to pay you, when they're going to pay you, how they're going to pay you, all that kind of stuff, so that you can take Blue Cross Blue Shield or Dean Health or Quartz Insurance or any of those other ones. And sometimes in that contract language, they'll tell you what they will and will not do. And some people get into situations where you get disadvantaged. And so learning to navigate through those contracts and that language, it's really helpful to have somebody who's been through it to guide you through that process. To this third point here, a lot of them really prioritized brief therapies, which may go against what clients need, and they don't always understand that. And so understanding as you practice your work, it's really helpful to know how you're getting paid and who's paying you. And if you're expected to provide brief, short services, you'll get practice doing that if you're working at a place that requires it. Like if you're working in a court system, you just know you're not going to see clients for all that long. And so you have to be the most effective you can be in the shortest amount of time. So there's an incentive there just to do good clinical work. And also the way you're getting paid, if you know you're only going to get paid for 6 sessions or something like that, then you're going to want to get good at brief therapies. And it's also really helpful to know what more longer term therapy looks like for clients that say, I can only afford this much, or I'm only here for this long, but here's what this work looks like when you do it in more long form ways. So even though you're asked to pick one theoretical orientation over another, just know that it's more complicated than that, and you'll likely want to get versed in several different kinds of modalities or theoretical orientations or service delivery models or something like that to be a really well-rounded. Then I'll skip over this last part about making friends. Remember, they're not your enemy. They're there to help. They're there to do good things. They might just be burned out and obnoxious, and they might be terrible people, but they're not the enemy. They shouldn't act like it anyway, unless they're being naughty. Okay, final notes. I think this goes without saying, but it's your responsibility to not accidentally or purposefully be fraudulent. The very beginning of the class, one of the questions I asked you, because I ask every class this, who here is a bad person who wants to be unethical? Nobody raises their hand, right? All of us want to do good things. Sometimes when we're desperate or when we're in rough times or we're not mentally well ourselves, we make, what's the right word? Successions. That's not the right word, but we make exceptions. Maybe that's the right word. We make exceptions to our values and the limits that we put upon ourselves. So oftentimes I think people get into trouble when they just get into bad situations or fall upon hard times where they're sort of accidentally doing things improperly, or we just haven't put in the time and energy it takes to understand how to do it right. So the book says don't necessarily listen to seasoned professionals, and I think that's good advice too. You want to find people that you trust who are knowledgeable, but also you'll hear a lot of opinions about what you can do and shouldn't do. Remember the very beginning of this hour when we were talking about everybody has their opinion about how they think things are supposed to be and what counselors do and what they don't do and what the profession is and isn't. Remember, even those people who have been doing it for a long time, things change and you provide new perspectives and new expertise. And some people are just burned out and jaded and just curmudgeonly anyway. So it's really important that you learn how to know when you have a trustworthy person. And go back to those quick side note tips about how you stay relational. If you feel that relationship, then it's a good indicator of knowing who's on your side, who's there with your best interest in mind, who can stay relational even when you're messing up and making mistakes. And you can tell when they're messing up and making mistakes, and they'll hear your feedback for them too. That's a person who's to keep around. All this comes from the textbook. They're examples of fraud. So I'm going to get my head out of the way for a second. Take a peek at those because it's good to see them and kind of get an example of what that is, because oftentimes, like I said, it happens unintentionally. There we go. We're done. Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. I gave a speech. Denise, you'll recognize this. I gave a speech about failing with grace. Get used to failing. Try things. Take risks while you're here in a safe environment in school, and mess up. Write a paper and get feedback on it, and try and take that feedback as well as you can to be to make constructive progress. Because those are hardships and they feel terrible and they make us feel terrible about ourselves, and they lead to all that imposter syndrome. And yet, the more we can say, yep, okay, now I have good information to move forward toward that extraordinary destiny, the better off we'll be, and the smarter we'll get, and the more competent and capable we'll become if we can just learn to take things into context and fail with grace, both for ourselves and for the people who are giving us feedback with our best interests in mind, if they are. There's the caveat. It says C.S. Lewis here, but I looked it up, and it's actually from the movie Chronicles of Narnia. It was the screenwriter for Chronicles of Narnia, not C.S. Lewis from the book. So if you're into accuracy, that's what that's all about. All right. That's all I got for you guys. Sorry for going over, but thanks for sticking with me. I love you guys, and I will talk to you next time. See ya.